Hello and welcome to DFS Coach Talk. It is Monday, May 25th, 2020. Happy Memorial Day, everybody. I've got my USA pen here. Shane, Mr. Caldwell, how's your holiday weekend going so far?
It's good, yeah. It feels like summer out there, so anytime it feels like summer, that's good. Watched the NASCAR race yesterday. Had a lot of good tributes to the military, fallen heroes. So they had a really good tributes there. It really reminded me how blessed we are to have, people that sacrificed their lives and their livelihood for our freedom. So that's really what Memorial Day is all about: is remembering our fallen heroes and appreciating how good we have it here. I think it was a really good tribute that they did at NASCAR for that yesterday. So I definitely watched some of that and yeah, enjoying the nice weather out here.
Excellent. Yeah, well said. And I really enjoyed the golf yesterday. That was a real treat. Fortunate to have some live action entertainment there with four legends. We got Tom Brady holding out from the fairway, battling right down to the 18th hole. Woods and Manning with the one-up victory. So nice crossover there between PGA and the NFL. And we, of course, are continuing our 32-day virtual tour of the NFL from a DFS perspective. And we get the Cleveland Browns today, Shane. And thankfully, they've cleaned house because, man, was that a mess last year with Freddie Kitchens. He had that whole incident where after the brouhaha with Pittsburgh, he had the T-shirt that said Pittsburgh started it. One of the strangest moves I've ever seen anybody make in professional sports. I mean, talk about gift wrapping bulletin board material for an opponent that already hates you. That's what he did, and then Pittsburgh, of course, went ahead and won, and Cleveland finished 6-10 and missed the playoffs. But like I said, they've cleaned house, and that's exciting for everybody who cares about the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, and the Cleveland Browns have been known for a long time now as a poorly run organization. And I remember a few years ago watching Hard Knocks when they were on there, watching John Dorsey run around and just the way he interacted with people, his leadership style, and he's kind of just old school. And I was like, this guy's the GM. Like, I don't have any confidence in this guy. And of course, he was the one that decided to trade their entire draft class away to get Odell Beckham. That hasn't worked out so far. He was the one that endorsed Freddie Kitchens. It was kind of like the good old boys network in there, like, hey, let's just hire this guy. He seems pretty cool. So it just didn't work out at all. They were the ultimate paper champion, overhyped team last year. Going into last year, people were way too high on them, just as if one trade to get Odell Beckham was going to put them over the Super Bowl hump. There was a lot of Super Bowl hype going on with this team, and turns out they couldn't even compete for the playoffs of the division. So I think that now they've really actually done a good job. They fired John Dorsey. They hired this GM Andrew Berry, who's a young guy. He's the youngest GM in the history of NFL. He's only 32 years old. He's a real up and comer. I think he's a really smart, using more analytics and a lot more of the newer technology, not that old school stuff like John Dorsey did. So I really like his draft and his free agent acquisitions we'll talk about, and then also the hiring of head coach Kevin Stefanski from Minnesota. I think was a great hire. So with those combinations of a great offseason for draft and acquisitions and a new GM that I think is really has a lot of good things going for him, and a great new head coach that I think is going to be a good head coach in the league. I think this team is actually looking up this year, where last year they thought they were, but they were actually just fake last year. But I think they're actually for real this year.
I agree. The hype last year just didn't pan out. I think their chances are much better this year of meeting expectations. So before we break down that new coaching staff and each position, just want to introduce everybody to DFS Coach Talk. If you're new to the program, we cover the NFL, NBA, and Major League Baseball. We focus on the eye tests. We don't use optimizers as we build our lineups. In the meantime, we're covering the KBO, the Korea Baseball Organization. So if you're just chilling this afternoon, hanging out without much to do at the barbecue, check out our website, DFSCoachTalk.com. Pick up one of our memberships, weekly, monthly, or yearly. And starting tonight, 6 days a week, every night that there's KBO, We're providing free KBO lineups to our members for FanDuel. We give everybody a player pool on DraftKings. We've had a real solid start to the season. So pick up one of our memberships, and those are going to be frozen until we get a pro sport back up and running in the U.S. So Shane, let's jump into the changes at the top. You mentioned Stefanski coming over from Minnesota. They also have new coordinators, but Stefanski certainly, with that offensive background, very successful last year. Minnesota was 8th in points and 6th in rushing yards. That was really the theme in Minnesota. They were heavy on the run. How do you think his background and experience will translate for the Cleveland Browns this year?
Yeah, I think it's good for the Cleveland Browns because they finally figured out a way to improve their offensive line. That's where it all starts. So not only protecting Baker Mayfield because he's proven he wasn't good under pressure, but to really be able to open up some holes and have a great scheme for these talented running backs that we're going to talk about. I think this is a perfect hire. This team is definitely that AFC North kind of that hard-nosed type football is what they want to play. Play tough defense and run the ball. They weren't really good at in terms of controlling the clock last year. They saw teams dominate them really in the run game and control the time of possession and control the game. So they want to flip the script on them like Minnesota did last year. So if you think about the type of production that Minnesota, how dominant they were in the run game with Dalvin Cook and Alexander Madison and those guys, and then being able to set up the pass from that and protect their quarterback, that is really huge. So really high on Kevin Stefanski and Alex Van Pelt, and the fact that we'll talk about their offensive line at some point. I love their offensive line now, where before you looked at their offensive line, you're like, oh man, this is really bad. So that was one of the things that people ignored last year is their offensive line when we were talking about how hyped up the team was. People were like, well, their offensive line is questionable, but they're like, but they got Odell Beckham though. It's okay. It's not that easy, right? It starts up front. Okay. So you got to protect it. So this team was already pretty good at rushing the ball with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt last year. And they didn't even have Kareem Hunt the whole year. So having Kareem Hunt the whole year, if both these guys stay healthy the entire year as a 1-2 punch, they're both going to be huge fantasy stars, especially in this offense with an improved offensive line. The other thing I want to point out in general, we've talked a lot about teams that want to run the ball this year. I think there's a trend in the NFL where teams are going to want to run the ball more, especially this year. There's less time for the quarterbacks and the wide receivers to get their timing down and to train together and get that chemistry. And even if you're changing the offense, to set up that running game is not as hard as the passing game, which is more predicated on timing and chemistry and routes and those type of things. So everything is pointing to a lot of running in the NFL, and this team is no exception. This team is super talented in the running game. I expect big things from this team in a great combination of coaching staff, O-line, and talent with the running back. So I know that's a lot, but that's an important point that I think I want to make about the running game in the NFL in general and specifically this team.
Yeah, that's a great trend to point out. And I'd like to have you break down the specific changes with the offensive line here in a minute. I just want to highlight the numbers. As you mentioned, for a team that finished that poorly, their running game is already set up with all that talent. They finished with a 4.8 yards per carry last year, which was 4th in the NFL. It was the passing game that was a real struggle. And the magic number in the passing game was 22, because this team was 22nd in passing yardage. And that resulted in them being 22nd in points scored and 22nd in yardage for the NFL. But I agree, the focus will be on that running game with Stefanski, and then Alex Van Pelt, the new offensive coordinator. He had 1 year as an offensive coordinator with Buffalo back in 2009, and that was a poor season. They were 30th in yards, 28th in points. But he's been spending his time in Green Bay recently coaching the running backs and the quarterbacks. So he'll have that focus as well. But if you could, just mention these changes to the offensive line that you think will improve this running game even more.
So obviously the most important position offensive line is typically offensive tackle, because you're setting the edge, trying to create space there for the running game. And those guys have to be, athletic and be able to move in space, and they really help with the pass protection. And they're going against the elite defensive ends and outside linebackers, right? So that was a huge weakness for the Browns last year, and that almost single-handedly, demolished their offense. When you got constant pressure on Baker Mayfield, a guy that's a little undersized, not good under pressure, took a lot of unnecessary risk, a lot of turnovers. So they brought in Jack Conklin, top free agent signing, offensive tackle, and he is a top tier offensive lineman, offensive tackle, great. And I believe that he probably would likely is going to start at right tackle. He's going to really help that right side of the game. So he's going to help with the pass protection and really help with this running game. So that's going to be huge. So Jack Conklin, really high on him. And then with the first round, we'll get into the details. They took Jedrick Wills out of Alabama. I think it was a great pick at number 10. Most people had him as the number one offensive lineman in this draft, and this draft was loaded with offensive line talent. So this guy's super athletic. He's got good size. He's just super quick off the ball, being able to get that quick punch in the running game, and really quick sets and good drop steps for the pass protection. So this guy is a great athlete. He can move in space. The type of things that they're going to do with those offensive tackles, and then having still a good center and guards inside there, that's really going to help Baker Mayfield, and really going to allow this Alex Van Pelt and Stefanski to do what they want to do, which is going to be run the ball, the power running game. And they also did add a fullback. They traded for fullback Andy Janovich. And the fact that they gave up, I think they gave up, it was like a 7th round. But if you traded for someone, that tells you they want to run the ball with the power game. Be able to do that if they got added a fullback there. So as you can tell, really high in the offensive line, really like the additions that they made. I mean, last year they had like Greg Robinson out there, who was one of the biggest draft busts of all time. You had him starting at left tackle. So now you're going to have Jedrick Wills protecting the blind side of Baker Mayfield. And now Jedrick Wills started at right tackle last year because he was protecting Tua Tagovailoa's blind side. That's why he was at right tackle, I think, but he can play anywhere. So I know that's a long-winded explanation, but I think that's a really important part of this team, again, is the offensive line there.
Now let's talk about the defensive side and the rushing game there, because that was the real weakness for Cleveland. Teams gashed them on the ground. They were 30th in yards allowed at over 2,300. They gave up 5 yards a carry, which was 30th in the league. And the man charged with leading that resurrection is Joe Woods. He was the defensive coordinator in Denver in 17 and 18, had one strong year, one down year. And then last year he spent in San Francisco coaching the defensive backs. So he comes into Cleveland trying to improve this terrible run defense. The pass defense was above average. They ranked 7th in yards allowed. What do you see as the outlook for the defense this year for the Browns?
It's hard to see the rush defense getting much better. I was really concerned that, they'd already lost Christian Kirksey last year to injury. That's what, hurt them. But they had Joe Schobert stepped in and had like 133 tackles. I thought he was pretty solid. But they did lose him in free agency as well to the Jaguars. He signed a big deal there. So I think they're weak at linebacker. They're inexperienced and weak at linebacker. So that tells me teams are going to really attack them. I like their defensive front really with, Sheldon Richardson and, their ends are still pretty solid as well with Myles Garrett, Olivia Vernon. So they're decent there. I just think that second level, once you get through that line, they're not really that great there. Now they did draft a safety, Grant Delpit, who's a big safety who played at LSU, and we'll talk about him. He might be able to step up in the box and help with the running game against the running game as well. And then for pass defense, they wwere 7th. I guess we were talking about earlier how that could be just because teams just ran on them and they weren't facing a lot of volume. But I do think that that their starting corners are really good, actually. So definitely like Denzel Ward, I think, is a really good corner. Greedy Williams, if he can take that step in the second year. and improve. They have Kevin Johnson, and then they really have some good safeties back there as well now. So I like their secondary. So I do, and they have a decent pass rush as well. If they can, everyone can stay healthy and stay on the field, because obviously Myles Garrett was suspended last year as well. So I'm pretty high on them against the pass. It's not a team that you want to initially attack. Maybe as like a wide receiver 2 or a tight end against them, but Denzel Ward is actually legit. He's a borderline shutdown corner there. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, definitely they're not going to be that great against the rush. But of course, teams aren't going to have as many opportunities either, because if they actually run the ball more and score more and run the clock up more, they're going to control the time of possession, as opposed to them getting dominated in time of possession the way it was last year. So that's going to change the game script there as well, how easy it is to run the score up on them.
Yeah, and as we alluded to yesterday, this is a real tough division to defend against the run. You've got Baltimore with that elite rushing attack. You've got Connor in Pittsburgh, and then you've got Joe Mixon and company in Cincinnati. So that'll be a big challenge for Cleveland all season long. So let's start to break down the offense here, one position at a time. Baker Mayfield at the helm, entering year 3. I don't think either one of us is really wowed by his performance so far. Under 60% completion rate last year, and didn't take care of the ball. So what's your breakdown of Mr. Mayfield as he enters year 3?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Baker Mayfield, but to his credit, last year he had injured wide receivers. Odell Beckham really wasn't healthy. Jarvis Landry was decent. The tight ends were inconsistent. So he didn't really have that many weapons in the passing game. Then he had a really bad offensive line and a really bad offense in terms of activity and the play calling. So he had a lot of bad combinations going there. He wasn't set up for success. And he took a lot of unnecessary risk, 21 interceptions to 22 touchdowns. So basically having about the same amount of touchdowns and interceptions, not a good completion percentage. Really not a great year for him. So I think that this year he will be slightly better, but I don't think he's going to have that much volume. So I don't think he's a guy that you're going to be able to get a high ceiling out of, but I think he should be more efficient and smarter. I think one of the things that Stefanski and Alex Van Pelt will help him with is making smarter reads, and as he goes through his progressions, and being smarter with the football and not taking unnecessary risk, and just having a more creative offense. And then that run attack is going to set up that play action pass. And, Mayfield's pretty good at kind of, play action pass and, throwing on the run and those type of things that you want to do. And then, of course, just better pass protection. Again, that goes back to the offensive line. That's going to help Mayfield. So I expect him to improve. But he's type of guy that will get 25 touchdowns this year. And if he can throw for, close to what he had last year, 3,800 to 4,000 yards, and then just get it up to 25 touchdowns, and then just get his interceptions down a little bit, up into the lower teens, then that would be a big improvement right there. He's not going to have to do as much. I think they're going to take the ball out of his hands a little bit more to protect him. And just like I said, it's going to be more of a running team. But yeah, things are going to be a lot better for him this year with a better offensive line. He's got a lot more help around him, and if those wide receivers can stay healthy, that will really help Baker Mayfield. So I think he's decent, but in terms of DFS, he's kind of a hard guy to target. It's be really hard. It's going to be certain matchups that you think they might get into a shootout, but it's not going to be the type of game environment that you're going to want to target a quarterback for a high ceiling in DFS, and his price is probably not going to be cheap enough to justify that. So are you kind of on the same page there, or what do you think?
I am. The real problem with him is the ceiling. So for GPPs, it's just not wise to invest in him. Last year, he had 4 games over 20 fantasy points on DraftKings, but he never got to 30. Now, the interesting thing is, based on his price, he was a decent value for cash games. 8 out of 16 weeks, he got you 3x or more, but just barely. So he didn't have the ceiling that we want in GPPs. I agree. I don't expect that to change much, because I do think they're really going to try to have a balanced offensive attack here. But hopefully, like you said, he'll be more efficient. He's got to get over 60% completion rate. He's got to take care of the ball better. This team lost the turnover battle 28-20 last year. So that's a real emphasis of improvement. Now, the backup this year is Case Keenum. And this makes sense to me. He's got some chemistry with Stefanski. Back in 2017, they were together in Minnesota. Uh, Stefanski was the quarterbacks coach that year. And when I think of Case Keenum, I know he's a journeyman. His record hasn't been great overall, but for some reason, I must just think about that 2017 year because he was very productive that year. He was 64%, 67% completions that year. Led the team to an 11-3 record when he started, and he was 22-7 touchdown to interception. So he took care of the ball. He was efficient, made good decisions. Really, he was performing the way that we were just talking about. Hoping that Baker Mayfield can perform in that fashion. So I think he's a terrific backup, and he's a guy that I wouldn't hesitate to use in a spot start because I expect his price would be low.
Yeah, no, this is a rare situation where I like the backup almost better than the starter. That's really rare. But what a great signing by them. This guy's been, I don't know how many teams this guy's been on, like 6 or something like that. But Case Keenum is a baller. I mean, he's a smart, savvy veteran quarterback. And yeah, he can have some big ceiling games, really consistent. Like you said, I noticed that as well when I'm looking up his history, that he really played his best when he was in Minnesota. He's had a couple of other good seasons here and there as well, but he played great in Minnesota, so he's perfect for this offensive system. He already knows the system, so he probably knows the system a lot better than Baker Mayfield does. So he's at a huge advantage there, and he's really going to help out Baker Mayfield in terms of being able to teach him some things about the offense, being that they have a shortened offseason. But you've never really seen too many situations where Baker Mayfield gets injured early in the year. Stefanski will be like, okay, let's go. Like he'd be like, I'm fine with Keenum. Like there's not that big of a drop off there. And I know Baker Mayfield was the number 1 overall pick. It's hard to say, it's hard to fathom that. But I think that they're very similar. Case Keenum's a little bit smarter, maybe not quite as much of an arm talent as Baker Mayfield is. But he's got a lot of talent. So I think that they can't be in a better situation for a backup quarterback because if someone goes down, again, they're going to run the ball and set up play action passes. They got a better offensive line. They got a lot of weapons. So if Baker Mayfield goes down, they can still win with Case Keenum, which is, you can't say that about all backup quarterbacks. So yeah, fantasy wise, he'd be a great target where people, see Cleveland and they see Case Keenum and they go, oh no, I'm not playing that. But they're not thinking about all the familiarity with the offense. So he's a perfect target in DFS if he ever plays, which for Cleveland fans, they probably hope that he never does, but you never know. We'll see.
Absolutely. So we'll make a note on that for sure. Now, let's transition to the running game. We've been talking about it a lot. They've got tons of talent there with Chubb and Hunt, and Chubb was healthy. He played all 16 games, had almost 1,500 yards, 5 yards a carry. Talk to me about Nick Chubb and the 2020 season.
As you could probably tell, I've talked a lot about the offensive line and the running game. I'm really high on Chubb and Kareem Hunt. We'll get to. Here's the thing I kind of like about Nick Chubb is that most fantasy players, whether it's DFS or season log, are going to look at this year and they're going to say Kareem Hunt didn't play last year, the entire year, because he was suspended half the year. And they're going to say Kareem Hunt is going to eat into Nick Chubb's production, right? Which makes total sense, right? That's the first thing you look at. You say, I'm going to fade Nick Chubb because Kareem Hunt's going to eat into it. And I think that's completely wrong. I want to take advantage of that. I think that there's going to be so much running volume and so much production in the running game for this team that both Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt are going to be fantasy superstars. I think they're going to be real life football stars and fantasy stars. I think it's just all going to be good for them. Again, you have a better offensive scheme that they're going to implement and lean on a lot. You have a much better offensive line. Okay. And then you have 2 healthy stud running backs. So Nick Chubb, this was last year with a really bad offense and a bad offensive line. He had almost 300 carries, 1,494 rushing yards at 5 yards per rush, which is huge. Again, behind a subpar offensive line, 8 touchdowns. And then he had 36 receptions, 278 yards. He didn't get any receiving touchdowns there. So those are great stats. So Nick Chubb is the type of guy that I could see pushing for closer to 1,800 rushing yards this year. And I don't really care about the Kareem Hunt. I get it. I love Kareem Hunt. I get it. That's going to take into some of his production, but I think they're going to be so efficient and run the ball so much volume that he's still going to have bell cow production and really good, obviously, yards per attempt and really good red zone production too. And he can still catch the ball a little bit. So really high on Nick Chubb. If you look at last year, again, in this bad situation, he had 42 fantasy points with his ceiling game. That's on DraftKings, PPR format, 33, 28, 27. He had the big ceiling games. So he was definitely a target in DFS. Then the second half of the season, again, this is the Kareem Hunt argument. He did have 4 duds in the second half of the season when Kareem Hunt came back. But again, how was the offense overall? Wasn't really that good. So I want to take advantage of, statistically, he did have some bad games with Kareem Hunt in there, and I think people are going to lean on that. And I'm hoping that I'm right about this, and that Nick Chubb, even with Kareem Hunt, is going to be a top level. I think top 5 running back in fantasy. I know that's kind of bold, but that's kind of what I'm looking at, and it's a little contrarian, but that's good. I'd be able to take advantage of it. I know it's kind of a bold statement. What do you think?
Yeah, that is bold. I don't think I'll go quite that far. I do think he'll take a bit of a hit. If you look at the numbers when Hunt was there, Chubb did have 400-yard games in the second half of the season. So he was still strong and productive. His 2 stealing games were earlier in the season, though, without Hunt. And the thing that really hurt Chubb is that Hunt was so good catching balls out of the backfield. I mean, Hunt caught 37 balls in only 8 games. And that's where Chubb took a hit. His receptions went down. So maybe I'd be a little bit more likely to play him more on FanDuel, where I'm not worrying so much about the receiving volume. But what a 1-2 punch overall.
But you remember in our NFL preview, our very first NFL podcast, remember the example I brought up? We were talking about DraftKings versus FanDuel, right? This must have been at least a month ago. I said, perfect example, Nick Chubb, FanDuel all day, right? Kareem Hunt, perfect for DraftKings. So I brought that up, a long time ago, but it's a great example of that. So so what do you think about Kareem Hunt? I know you play a lot of DraftKings PPR format. You got to be loving this guy.
Yeah, it just comes down to the price. And, he started out around $3K actually on DraftKings. And so he smashed value early. But then they priced him up to 6.6. So he was very consistent with his receptions. In the 8 games, his totals were 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So guy was getting targets every week. He was on pace for almost 75 catches if he played a full season. So it's just going to come down to price. I'll certainly play him, 4.5K or less in a heartbeat. He got 3 scores in half a season, 4.2 yards per carry. So, I think it's going to come down to price, but I agree. I'm looking at Chubb on FanDuel and Hunt on DraftKings.
Yeah, here's the thing with Kareem Hunt. Again, I'm projecting really high volume in this rushing offense. So even with both of them playing, even if they're splitting time or whatever the split is, Kareem Hunt, I think, is going to get more volume. He's still going to get probably a little bit more rush attempts than he did last year, and probably even more receptions. And I think he'll be even more efficient with the receptions and the run attempts. And I think he has positive regression for touchdowns. Because, again, I think the offense in general is going to be better. They're going to be more red zone opportunities, more touchdown opportunities. They're going to score more, basically. Because what were they, 22nd scoring overall, just over 20 points a game. So they're going to be better in that category, which is going to help Kareem Hunt here. And I think he's way too talented to only have, he in half a season, he had 2 rushing touchdowns, one receiving touchdown. So I think he's going to have a lot more touchdowns, and he's going to get volume in the passing game, and he's going to be efficient in the run game. So really high on the guy. Yeah, you definitely have to look at his price, because he's not guaranteed a ton of volume, because he's not going to get the majority of the snaps. But again, I think there's just so much volume to go around. At least it's not a 3-headed monster where they have some other guy that rotates in there. What you're going to get. You can look at the game scripts too. If it's a team that they're going to be down a lot, maybe they're going against Baltimore, and Baltimore's real good against the power run game, and they're going to pass the ball to running backs more. They feel like they can exploit those matchups because Baltimore gets big leads on people, right? Then maybe it's a Kareem Hunt game. and you can feel a little more confident in that. Where they're going against, Washington Redskins, or what was the other team that they had that was real easy?
Cincinnati, week
Yeah,
2.
Cincinnati, that's probably going to be more of a Nick Chubb game, right? So we're probably going to be looking at those things as well. But yeah, as you can tell, really high on both of these guys, and excited to watch this running attack and the receivers catching balls out of this backfield. This offense is set up perfectly for it.
Well, let's transition to the rest of the pass catchers, the wide receivers and the tight ends. And based on this heavy run volume, let's figure out, with what's left over, who we're going to want to target. It's year 2 of the OBJ experiment. Year 1 really didn't go well. He ended up with solid numbers, over 1,000 yards, but he really never hit value on DraftKings. He only had 1 week out of 16 where he paid off at least 3x. So what are your thoughts on OBJ?
So just as you're saying that, obviously, that I'm not very high on this passing game, so I'm not really high on the receivers. My issue with OBJ's, he's coming off the season with injuries, so I guess you can certainly make the argument he was injured most of last year, so he really couldn't play. He had core issues, a lot of different issues, so he really wasn't at his elite level that he normally is. So you could make that argument that if he comes back healthy, he can have a good year. But that's not really what this offense is going to do. So I look at OBJ as, remember like Stephon Diggs last year, because I just keep comparing Minnesota because this is basically that offense, right, that Stefanski's bringing. He was the offensive coordinator. So Odell Beckham is like Stephon Diggs last year. He's like the diva star wide receiver that's mad because they just keep running the ball and dominating, but he's not getting his, right?
Yeah.
That's Odell Beckham. Now, again, Stephon Diggs, Odell Beckham, big enough to have a couple good games. Didn't Stephon Diggs have one game where he had like 4 touchdowns? That's the type of talent Odell Beckham has, but he's only going to have a few of those games. So he's definitely I guess Odell Beckham, we used to think of him as just this phenom. He came out in his first few years. He's a name that people love because of this production, but now he's super talented, boomer bust type wide receiver, and that's the way I see him. So I don't really want to guess on which. I don't really want to play the guessing game, but if I did play the guessing game, again, it's going to be in those game scripts that they're going to be down quite a bit, and where I think I can get him in a good cornerback matchup. I don't like him matching up against Baltimore's corners, so definitely not good there. But yeah, probably some of those other teams, like we were saying, Washington, Cincinnati, definitely like those cornerback matchups there when they're playing those type of teams. So I think that you can target him, but is he going to be super expensive because of the name in the high level production he's had in the past? Does the algorithm factor that in? Probably does. If he's around $7,000 on DraftKings, I don't think he's a good value there. That's the problem. So again, you have to think he's kind of like Stephon Diggs last year, which would you play Stephon Diggs every week? Probably not, the way he's done that, even though he's talented, right? So that's my take on Odell Beckham. I don't know, are you higher on him than I am?
I don't think so. I think I'm right on the same page with you. And that's a great comparison to Diggs, and just pretty shocking that Beckham's ceiling was 1 game over 30, and it was just barely over 30. It was 6 catches for 161 and 1. And then 1 game barely over 20, 6 catches for 84 yards and a touchdown against Miami. Other than that, every game was in the teens or under 10. Just abysmal ceiling. And for a guy that, he got even higher than 7K, he got up to 7.8K on DraftKings. So just almost never paid off value. So yeah, if the price goes down a little bit, which it's hard to predict that it would because of that name value, then I'll consider him, but certainly matchup dependent. And, I'm going to think twice before I pay that much for him.
Yeah, I mean, he might have a little higher ceiling this year. He might be able to pop off for a couple big games. Again, the offense will be better. They should have more time to throw the ball, and just defenses are really going to have to focus on stopping the run game so Odell Beckham can sneak out of there. And if he's actually healthy, was he really hobbled all last year? That's the question. And is he going to be that much better being healthy this year? So he can pop off for some big games. So I wouldn't be shocked there. He's super talented, but it's just hard to trust him overall.
Yeah, it sounds like here in late May that he is recovering nicely from his core surgery. And then we turn to Jarvis Landry. He's also trying to recover from surgery. And this guy's been consistent. He's been selected to 5 straight Pro Bowls. So the big caveat certainly here is his health. But similar situation with Beckham last year, he only had 3 fantasy games over 20. So how do you think it's going to shake out for Landry this year?
I mean, Landry actually coming down the stretch was actually playing really good last year. I mean, he had more targets than Odell Beckham, a lot more catches. He had 83 catches, 1,174 yards. His average was a little more than Odell Beckham. They were both around 14, and he had more touchdowns than Odell Beckham, 6 touchdowns, right? So he played great. It's just now that he's coming off a hip surgery, that's very concerning for like a speedy slot receiver who really relied on his run after the catch and his route running ability. And you're coming off a hip surgery. I don't trust that at all. And the guy's not getting any younger either. So I liked him, but with the injury issues, being that it's a new offense, and they're going to want to run the ball more. I'm not going to like him, especially at the beginning of the year. It's going to be a wait and see approach. Now, if he can get back to his old self after the surgery and acclimate in the offense, he could have a role similar to like Adam Thielen in this offense. Again, I got to bring up the Minnesota guys because that's what they're going to be doing, and they're similar players actually. Stephon Diggs, Odell Beckham, Adam Thielen, Jarvis Landry. So I like that comparison to be able to have those guys, but I'm not going to trust Jarvis Landry, and he's not going to be on any of my radar for any fantasy. Especially during like the first like 6 games, I just can't trust him. If he has a training camp, it's going to be a shortened training camp. He's recovering from that hip surgery still, so outlook doesn't look good. So again, tells me less weapons. There's going to be good production for maybe the tight ends more in the short passing game that we're going to talk about. I know there's someone you're excited to talk about there. So that's my take on Jarvis Landry there.
Yeah, and the frustrating thing for those two guys is that they were healthy. Last year, Beckham played 95% of the snaps. Landry played 94% of the snaps. So for them to combine for only 10 touchdowns, just a major disappointment. So, we'll see how Mayfield navigates the dynamic of trying to keep both of those guys happy and try to take advantage of their talent. So we'll just have to wait and see what those price tags are and make sure that Landry's healthy. But after those two guys, it's a bit of a mess. Who do you think is most likely to be the third most productive wideout for Cleveland?
Yeah, I like Rashard Higgins if he can have a full season. He played only 6 games last year, and they were rotating, random guys in there, experimenting, guys in and out of the roster. But yeah, I like Rashard Higgins. I think Baker Mayfield likes him. He's got good size. He's pretty good hands. And a guy that is a veteran type presence. Traditionally could be a red zone presence too because he's got good size. He only caught 1 touchdown, but he only played 6 games. He only had 11 targets last year. But I like Rashard Higgins as that third wide receiver here. If he can stay healthy the whole year and improve offense. But again, there's not going to be enough volume to warranty it. So he's more like a showdown sleeper type guy, small slate type guy you might target.
Yeah, the year before when he got more action, he did catch 39 passes for 572 yards and 4 touchdowns, but a lot more weapons now to deal with. So I agree. I won't plan to target him. He's back on a 1-year contract, by the way. So good chance he'll be out there a bunch, but I don't plan to target him. And then after that, it gets even more thin. I'll mention Ratley before you talk about the rookie from Michigan. Damian Ratley was actually next in terms of productivity for Cleveland last year in the wideouts. He only had 12 catches for 200 yards. He did, finish strong in that last game. He caught two balls for 64 yards and a touchdown. So paid off value in that difficult week 17 to try to break down in DFS. But really, thin. We got Kadero Hodge on the roster right now. He only caught 4 passes last year. So what do you think about the rookie Donovan Peoples-Jones out of Michigan?
Well, as you can see, the injury history with their star wide receivers and not much depth. So this guy is, even though he's drafted in the 6th round, he's super talented. Donovan Peoples-Jones, if you watched his combine, I mean, he's got great size. He's like a 4'4", 40 guy, like 40-inch vertical. I mean, he's a complete athletic freak. I think the knock on him was really not that great route runner and not great hands, like he would drop passes. But if you look at that Michigan offense, they really didn't pass the ball that much. They didn't have a good quarterback. They didn't really have a good passing production in that offense with Harbaugh out there in Michigan. So it could have just been the fact that this guy was one of the top recruits, coming out of high school. He was one of the top receivers in the entire nation. Super talented, and maybe just that, when he gets a little better at his fundamentals and better coaching in NFL and a better passing system with better quarterbacks and everything, that he could actually develop into a good wide receiver. So I think that he is, he may not start right away, but I think he's going to get into the mix once he acclimates in the offense and proves himself. And he's got so much athletic upside and talent that I think you have to give this guy a chance. And he'll also play a lot of special teams. He'll be really good as like a gunner on the outside, really fast, big physical guy. And then he's really good at like punt returns. He did do some punt returning at Michigan. So I like him at special teams contribution right away, and then rotating in and starting to get some snap shares and getting comfortable in the offense and getting better throughout the year. So it's a guy that you have to keep an eye on, because if he can improve on his pass catching and route running ability, his athletic talent is freakish and could be really good. So it's a guy that you have to keep on your radar for sure.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the production didn't really match the athletic profile. He got 1,050 yards and 14 touchdowns at Michigan, but that's in the last 2 years. So just a low volume, not huge numbers.
Yeah, if you look at 2018, he had 47 catches, over 600 yards, and 8 touchdowns. For that passing offense, they don't really pass that much. Really bad quarterbacks. That's pretty good in the college game. So that's kind of my take on him. But yeah, and if you just look at the raw stats, it doesn't look good. But I think it's a guy that could take a big jump in the NFL once he develops. He's going to take a little while. He's kind of raw athlete. It'll take a little while to develop him.
All right. Let's transition to the tight end group. A lot of turnover here. Last year, Ricky Seals-Jones and Demetrius Harris were there. They're both gone. Jones had 14 catches for over 200 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's now with Kansas City. Harris had 15 catches for 149 and 3 touchdowns. He's now with the Bears, like every other tight end under the sun. So that's almost 30 catches, almost 400 yards and 7 touchdowns. Then you've got Njoku coming back. He only played 4 games. But before we get to him, big splash in the offseason, Austin Hooper, coming over from Atlanta. He's been selected to 2 straight Pro Bowls, and this guy put up huge numbers with Matt Ryan. They signed him to a 4-year deal for $44 million. Last year, he finished with 75 catches, 787 yards in only 13 games. Got in the end zone 6 times. Caught 77% of the passes thrown his way, and 8 of the 13 games he played, he caught at least 6 receptions. And you're starting to get a sense of why I really liked him last year, especially on DraftKings. And it is a new offense, though. New quarterback, David Njoku is there. So I guess we can't just expect that he'll have the similar production to last year, even though he's shown he's got the talent, the ability to do it. What's your outlook for Hooper this year?
If you see me shaking my head, you know what my outlook is here. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see me. I'm shaking my head. No. So, yeah, I think he's a guy that overachieved. He is very talented, but I think he was a byproduct of that Atlanta system, was really good for tight ends. Okay, and you got to keep in mind he's playing with Julio Jones, who I think is one of the best wide receivers in the game, that demands double teams from safeties and all the time, demanded so much help. So I think that freed up the fact that Julio Jones taking all that attention because he's so dominant, really freed up a lot of space underneath for Austin Hooper. And I think Matt Ryan is a really good quarterback at going through those reads and getting that, where Baker Mayfield's not as good at going through his reads and connecting with the tight ends here. So I don't like Baker Mayfield as much. I don't like the offensive system as much for tight ends, and he doesn't have Julio Jones there. You could say, well, he's got Odell Beckham, but it's not the same. Odell Beckham at this point in his career is not demanding double teams, right? For the most part. So I really like. I think Njoku's pretty good as well. He's coming back. They took his 5th-year option there. He's coming back for his 4th year. If he can be healthy, he's really physical. He'll probably do more pass blocking, but he can get out there and get some passes as well. So I think it's good for the play action pass, and like the tight end screens and the different plays that they'll have will be creative, because they do have a void at wide receiver. Because I said, Jarvis Landry might be injured. They're not very deep at receiving targets. So he will get some production there. But again, there's not going to be a lot of passing volume. I think he'll be good, but not. I wouldn't expect the same type of statistics that he was putting up in Atlanta's offense. So I think that he's for me, he's kind of a sell high guy, or a guy that I'm not that high on, because I think people are way too high on him. So it's a guy that I'm looking to fade for the most part. Now I could be wrong there, but everything that I explained is I think that he's a fade for me at tight end. Overhyped.
Well, unfortunately, I think I may have to agree with you in terms of the targets will be down, so his production won't be as explosive or as efficient. Njoku is going to be a real thorn in his side. When he was healthy in 2018, he played every game. He caught 56 for 639 and 4 scores. So, he already has that history with Mayfield. So we'll just have to see the snap counts, week 1, week 2 targets, and see how that's going to break down.
Yeah, and I will say real quick that the fact that if Jarvis Landry is not playing or limited on snaps, that really could help Hooper. Hooper could basically play, my favorite position is, you already know it because I say it all the time, big slot, basically, right? So the tight end lineup in the slot position is awesome for fantasy production, because you're basically getting a mismatched wide receiver in there, right? So I will say that if things are looking a little iffy with Jarvis Landry, that I will upgrade Hooper where he can get similar production, because really that's what happened with Atlanta too. They over the years, last few years, they had a lot of injuries and that type of thing. And they didn't have that many pass catching guys, because I remember like when Mohamed Sanu got traded and Mohamed Sanu was injured. Remember that? All of a sudden, Austin Hooper started catching more passes because he was that, Sanu was that quick slot guy. So Hooper actually took that role. So I'll argue with myself in saying, if Jarvis Landry is not getting much production or snap counts, that you can upgrade Hooper, that he could get closer to production. But overall, I'm not as high on him. But it depends on the situation, right, with the team.
Yeah, excellent reference there to Sanu. And you're allowed to argue against yourself. You're allowed to have exceptions to the rule. It certainly depends on who's in the lineup and of course the matchup each week. Now, let's talk about the Browns' 4th round pick, because if you like tight ends that line up in the slot, you've got to like Harrison Bryant out of Florida Atlantic.
Yeah, this guy 6'5", 240, and he had a great combine. He's a small school guy, but he ran a 4.7 40, which is good for a guy that size. And he showed great ability, great route running ability, and great hands. Was it last year? He did a lot of that slot tight end role. He lined up in the slot a lot. He has 65 catches, over 1,000 yards receiving, and 7 touchdowns. And he averaged over 15 yards per reception. So he is a guy that I can see developing in that slot tight end role and developing there, and a guy that should be able to make the team on special teams and backing up, so that if one of these guys gets injured, Hooper and Njoku, I think he is the 3rd tight end, and he is a guy that can, for a 4th round pick, should be able to make the team right away and have some upside as a receiver.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the 1,000-yard season for a college tight end, that's not easy to do. He did drop 8 balls last year on 73 catchable, which wasn't great, but terrific production overall. 6.1 yards after the catch per reception, and he forced 12 missed tackles, which was number 2 in the tight end class this year. So, a lot of great support for his future. Now, Shane, before we transition into the draft one more time to wrap up, please let everyone know where they can follow you on Twitter.
On Twitter and actually Instagram, I'm at DET Sports Shane. DET Sports Shane.
Oh, excellent. I'm going to have to check out the Instagram.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot on there. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot on there, but I do have an Instagram. That's the same as my Twitter.
Excellent. You can find me on Twitter at Language Olympic. And then please follow the crew. You can find us at DFSCoachTalk on Twitter. All right, Shane, one more breakdown of the draft for anything we haven't hit on. We have highlighted these guys as we've been going, but anything we need to clean up before we finish up?
Yeah, I can go pretty quickly here. Obviously, I already talked about Jedrick Wills. I think he's a day one starter. I think he was the best offensive lineman in this draft. So great pick there. I really like, and I think Browns fans really like this pick, is in the second round, pick number 44, they took safety Grant Delpit out of LSU. So the LSU champions, as everyone knows, I think their entire defense got drafted. They were that good, right? Or on NFL rosters at least. So this guy, 6'3", 201, big safety, super athletic and physical. He can pretty much do anything. He's a dynamic playmaker. Last year, he played through an injury. He had a high ankle sprain. He toughed it out and played through there, so he didn't have quite as good a year. But in 2018, he was projecting to be like a top 20 pick, like a first-round pick. So I like this guy's upside. I like him the ability to cover, to be a strong safety, and be able to actually stop the run better. So I really like his production there as safety, and he's going to be able to get in some sub packages or potentially start right away. So I think he's a great pick. That was a first-round talent that they got in the second round. And then we pretty much talked about most of the other guys. They got a linebacker out of LSU, Jordan Jacob Phillips, and he'll help their linebacker depth because that's a position of weakness for him. So that was a good pick. They got Jordan Elliott, defensive tackle from Missouri, developmental guy there as well, and then a center from Washington, a backup center, Nick Harris, so he can be a good backup there. And then I talked about Donovan Peoples-Jones in the sixth round that I do like if he can develop his techniques and his fundamentals, because he is a really good talent there. But yeah, overall, when you can really make a good pick with the offensive lineman and have a day one franchise start tackle at pick number 10, and a safety who I think is going to be a star safety in the league once he gets acclimated. Who's a kind of under the radar type guy, and then some other guys that will end up contributing right away and potentially be starters even in these late round picks. I think it was a good draft, and that's why. And you combine that with the free agents that they signed and the moves that they made. I really liked Andrew Berry, the GM that I was talking about earlier. The fact that they got rid of them and the new coaching staff. So I think that overall for the running game and for real world football, the Cleveland Browns are going to be a better team this year. And it's kind of tough in fantasy because if they're giving up a lot of running yards and they're trying to run the ball as well, it's going to be those kind of low scoring, what do we call them, knock down, drag it out, run the clock out type games. Those aren't necessarily good for fantasy, right? It's like a lot of, time possession back and forth. So kind of ugly football games. So some of these games might not be as good, but when teams where they're playing games where they're playing a really bad team, you could probably fire up that running game because they're just going to keep pounding the ball, where those guys can have huge ceiling games. So if they can get up by like 20, then Nick Chubb can just end up having monster games, and Kareem Hunt can still get in there as well to spell them and have monster games. So big things for the Cleveland Browns this year compared. I think they might be flying under the radar a little more this year, where they were super way overhyped last year. So it's a little different dynamic, but I think that things are looking up for them.
Yeah, well said. And I agree. And we're going to continue our coverage of the AFC North and knockdown, drag-out division as we cover the Pittsburgh Steelers tomorrow. In the meantime, as we close up, just want to mention our fearless leader, Joe Sarvati, who's known as Coach. His favorite charity is mambaon3.org. So feel free to give that a look. And we thank you again for joining us here. We're going to continue to provide these free podcasts 7 days a week in front of the paywall. So we would appreciate it if you give us a thumbs up, 5 stars, wherever you may be listening. If you're not watching already, we have these on YouTube. So head over there and click the subscribe button so you get a notification when our daily podcast posts. And that is going to do it for us today. Thank you very much, Shane, for your excellent work today. On behalf of Shane Caldwell, I am Andrew Hanson. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to tune in again tomorrow as we break down the Steelers right here on DFS Coach Talk.